Morning, good morning. On Facebook. Sure. Okay. Raising God's blueprint for raising God's blueprint for raising God's blueprint for raising world changers. Hey, King, did you get him something to eat? God's blueprint for everyone. Morning, good morning. Get ready, get ready.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Hey, good morning.
Good morning to you.
How are you?
Okay, ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready. You got anything?
I had some questions. Well, one question to ask you, but I'll wait till we start because that'd be a better way to ask it.
I was going to start with last week if they had any questions, so we can start with that.
Okay, so nobody's on right now. Okay.
Up to you if you want to ask your question now.
Okay. Oh, okay, here's the question. I was thinking about youth leaders, people that work with youth, parents, and we know we're talking to the parents too. And I was thinking about, you know how they say it takes a village to raise a child. And I was thinking about you leaders who work with children to build a relationship with the child and parent, and they can show them the kingdom principles that we learn here as a solution to problems.
Yes. So what's your question? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so I didn't quite understand your question or
Oh,
what you
okay.
were.
Let me
Say it
say
again.
it. Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, I'll say it again. So I was thinking about youth leaders that work with children,
Okay.
as well as, I know we're addressing parents and those who are raising children. So I was thinking about, you ever heard that quote that says it takes a village to raise a child?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about those youth leaders who work with children that builds a relationship with the child and the parent
Yeah.
to show them kingdom principles when, as a solution to problems.
To show the youth leaders or the children?
No, to show the parent, like if the parent's having a problem with the child,
Uh-huh.
and the information that we learn here, that we can use those as a solution, when the parent is going through something with the child.
Right. So, so to address that, that is something the Lord has directed me to do, is to get this message into churches. And so I'm working with my church now as a prototype to offer, we're offering it as a parenting class, but I certainly would invite all the teachers that work in the Sunday school program. Also, if our church has a school, so all those teachers, and also, like you said, the youth leaders. So anyone that works with children, so that we can all be on the same page. So the village can all be on the same page with
Right.
how we're interacting and equipping the next generation. So I totally agree with what you're saying. There is a program called, I don't know if you've heard of it, Love and Logic, and they do target teachers in the public schools and equip them with effective tools to manage the classroom. And they use, it's different than what I teach, but it's basic psychology and how to interact with the child in a kind of an objective way without getting sucked into the emotional push and pull of child behavior.
Right.
So it's good. It's good. It's definitely not all what I'm teaching here at all. I don't know that much about it. I just know it's very objective and just to.
Okay.
Anyway, but yeah, I totally agree with you that this message is not just for parents. It's primarily for parents. In any way we can get that message to parents, whether it's through youth leaders, pastors, whatever, because I'd love to hear this preached from the pulpit so that everybody can get it.
Awesome.
Right?
Yes, that would be great. I was also thinking, I want y'all to excuse me for this picture. I would be on here live, but I don't know. Well, I did something to this computer. I think I dropped it. So
Oh no.
This is the only picture that I could get up here. So excuse me, y'all.
Okay. That's all right.
And nobody's on yet. It was only six minutes after.
Well, and I forgot to post it in the group until yesterday, and so there was only that one notice about it.
No, I've been posting it in the group too.
Oh, have you? Okay.
I'm about to stream it in the group now.
Okay.
And it's streaming live on my page. It's in the event too. So if anybody want to get on, you can just go to the event and you can get right on right there. But if you want to get on the Zoom, you have to hit the
the Zoom link.
The link, yeah, the Zoom link.
So there may be people that'll watch in the Facebook group or on one of those other pages.
Yeah, it might be, yeah.
I know there was one woman in particular, she posted last week just how impactful the teaching was to her as a single mom. And I know she also commented on my post yesterday, so I expect her to be here. But again, maybe she's just watching in the Facebook group.
Right. Right. Yeah, because I was touched by somebody who expressed how this has blessed them. So that was, I said, it blessed me too.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad. Well, hopefully today's going to be just as impactful.
Yes, yes. So I'm putting it in a sonship lifestyle
All right.
now.
All right.
Okay. So you want me to pass you the host, or you want me to just let people in?
Oh, you can just let people in. That's fine. I don't need to be the host. I'm not sharing a screen or anything.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'm gonna put you in. I'm trying to see if it's on my page yet. All right, on my page. Yeah, I just want to let people know. Go to the event page, and you can get in that way too.
All right.
So many people said they were interested in. Someone said they were going. So, and I invited some individual people I thought might like to be in here.
Okay.
All right, I need to go to my page. That's the problem. All right, am I on? Yeah, I'm on my page now. I'm sharing it in Sonship Life. Sonship. Share in a couple of groups. Share. Okay, Sonship. Where you at? Okay, Sonship. All right, we're live, and it's live on my page too. So we live. Just wait for people to. Oh, there's 5 people on here already on Facebook Live.
Okay, perfect. They were waiting for us there.
Yes.
Well, fantastic.
All right, let me mute. You can start when you get ready. I'm muting.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us. Adila and I were on Zoom and didn't see anyone here. So I guess you guys have been waiting for us on Facebook, and I apologize, we're a little bit late today, but I'm ready to get started. I hope you're ready to get started. If you were with us last week, you hopefully experienced something that was life-changing for you, or at least the beginning of something that's life-changing for you and your kids. And I wanted to start today's session to see if anyone had any feedback. But since you guys are on Facebook, we can't really interact. So I really encourage you next week to get on the Zoom so that you can ask questions and we can interact. If you can do that now, you want to switch over, go ahead. There's a link in the event. There's also a link in the post I made yesterday in the comments with the Zoom link. Odila's got it several places. So if you want to jump over into the Zoom, we can do Q&A at the end because when you're on Facebook, I don't have a way to interact with you live. So I guess we'll skip feedback from last week. But if you do have any feedback, like if you were trying to apply what you learned last week, I'd love to hear your feedback and how that worked for you. So I encourage you to jump over to the Zoom link so we can talk about that at the end. So there's 2 parts to understanding what I'm teaching you about how to raise children who fulfill their kingdom destiny. And last week we talked about what our children need from us, that number one thing they need is approval. And this week, there's the other side to that coin. We can give approval to our children, but if we don't know how to give it in a way that they can receive it, then it's pointless. It's kind of like if you've heard of love languages. If I'm speaking a different love language to you, if your love language is acts of service and I'm giving you quality time, you may not feel loved the way you want to feel loved. I'm going to try and get rid of some of this glare here. There we go. So it's the same with our kids. We have to understand how they process, and we typically interact with them as if they are miniature adults, and they're not. And so today we're going to talk about a child's brain, how their brain develops. We're also going to talk about their spiritual state, because that's another, I call it the big lie. Who wants us to be kept in the dark is Satan, right? He wants to keep us in lies, so that because the truth sets us free. And so last week we learned about the big lie that, we need to teach our children right and wrong. And we learned that that's actually the poison fruit of death that Satan enticed Adam and Eve to eat, that caused the downfall of the entire human race. So the other side of that big lie is that we have seen our children in a skewed spiritual state that it isn't scriptural. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to show you in the scriptures the true spiritual state of your children when they come into the world, and then we'll have some practical application as well. So today is all about what makes your child tick. We're going to learn about understanding your child and why he does what he does, and how a child receives, processes, and responds to the input in the world, in his world. And so that includes the input that we give him. And so if you're not getting the response you want, you need to give different input. It's like the old computer term, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not getting what you want, you just need to change your input. And I shared that story about the first parenting class I ever took that taught me that lesson, that, as soon as I changed the way I was dealing with my daughter, instantly I got different results. So when you pick up the right tool, you get the right result. So that's one of the big areas that we have been in the dark about, is how our children process. And this is something that in our age of information overload, where and advancements in science and technology and medicine and all the things that we feel like we're so advanced in, well, we've actually digressed in our understanding of child development, because part of what I'm going to teach you today has been known for centuries, even before Christ walked the earth, but it's been lost in recent years. And why, I don't know, except the enemy wants to blind us to the truth so that he can keep us in darkness. So there's a verse in Colossians 3:21 that says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged." And it's different in different translations, but that's the gist of it. So some of the translations use the word aggravate. Do not aggravate your children. But I love the way the Passion Translation translates this, because it says, "Do not have unrealistic expectations of your children, lest they become discouraged." So that's part of the problem, is we have very unrealistic expectations of our children. And so it frustrates them and it frustrates us. And so when we can understand how our children process, and we can interact with them in a way that with understanding, it says, "Fathers, deal with your children, or with your wives with understanding." Well, we also have to deal with our children with understanding. Then it brings peace on both ends. And so once you understand how a child's brain develops, and you understand his spiritual state and how to interact with him, and you find out that God has rigged it so much in our favor that it's really difficult to mess it up. So the way that a child's brain develops is like an open door for us to have so much influence in their life when they're in the early years, when they're very young. And I think we talked about this a little bit last week, that a lot of times, parents see those very first few years as passive developmental stages, like, I've got to wait till my child, gets old enough to learn anything. And we don't start teaching them anything till that window of opportunity is closing. And so that's one of the ways that we misunderstand our children. So let's look at a little bit about brain development. I wrote down here to myself in my notes that God has made it so easy that a broke, homeless, single mom can raise successful kids. And I was referring to myself. So I'm not homeless now, but I was for a couple of different times when my kids were little. So why is this important that we understand our children? Because the lens that we look through, that we see our children through, determines our response. So if you believe your child knows something that he doesn't know, then you're gonna treat him as if he knows it when he doesn't. And in other words, look at it this way: you don't deal with a 15-year-old the way you deal with a 2-year-old. If a 2-year-old breaks something, it's a 2-year-old. If a 15-year-old breaks something because he's careless or whatever, then there's more responsibility there. And so it's really important that the lens that we see our children through is accurate. So we have to understand what our children are capable of, how he receives and processes information, and what motivates them. And we've been off on all three of those. So let's look at these and see if we can get some clarity and understanding. Because it's lack of knowledge, my people perish. And so we need knowledge about our children. We need to understand what makes them tick. So let's look at some basic brain development. And this is not rocket science. You don't have to go to college to know this stuff. In fact, the ancient Hebrew culture, they understood this just by observation. And it wasn't just the Hebrews, it was pretty much the human race understood children just by observation, and they didn't treat them or teach them or have expectations of them that were unrealistic. And so like I said, that's kind of a modern thing. And even in education, we'll talk about that in a minute, how our schools are failing because they don't understand how a child's brain develops, which is kind of sad. So there's three main developmental stages that I want to talk about right now. And the most important one is the very first one, from 0 to 3 years old. So when your child is born, he is in a delta brainwave state. And this is the same brainwaves you and I have when we're in a deep sleep. And this goes on for the first about 3 years of life. And so the child isn't even consciously aware. He's in a dreamlike state. And one psychologist put it this way. He said, it's as if they're asleep with their eyes open. So their brain is asleep. So think about that. You don't have any conscious memories before about age 3. Most people don't, unless there was some sort of severe trauma. Some people remember that. So they're in this state that we are when we're asleep. So they're completely receptive. They're not even aware of what's going in. They receive everything as fact. They have no filter, no ability to judge or evaluate information, and no data bank of information to compare it to, which they can't compare anyway. So everything comes in and is filed away, and it creates the foundation of their understanding for their entire life. And so what psychologists say is that our entire worldview is shaped in those first 3 years, and by age 3, your worldview is set. That's pretty incredible to think about. So we as parents have that window of opportunity to shape their worldview in those first 3 years with absolutely no resistance, no argument, or anything. So, I would hold my newborn babies in my arms and I just talk to them about life and about who they were, and telling them what was true, speaking truth to them. And there's actually some educational methods that use this. I've seen it in some private schools. It's not very widely used, but they just rapidly input information, and it's all about education. It's not anything life-changing. They're just teaching them facts so that when they go to school, it's kind of filed away in there. To me, that's a useless waste of, not useless, but it's a pretty low level use of this stage of development that we have, when we can be teaching them about God, that God loves them, created them, that they're unique and valuable, that they have a purpose, and that they're one with God, all the things you want them to know. And so this is a window of opportunity that we have, that whatever we tell them, they believe, because they don't have any ability not to believe it. So it's kind of dangerous information in the wrong hands, because, if you want to do harm or, brainwash your child, you could do that in an evil way. But I know that in this group, we're not going to do that. Most of us want good things for our children. So, but it's very dangerous information, but it's also very valuable to be able to tell your child anything about himself, about the world, about God, about other people, and that will become his worldview. Now, if your children are older than 3, don't feel like, oh, I've missed my window of opportunity, because that window doesn't slam shut. from age 3 to 8, they're still in a highly, scientists call it highly suggestible state. They'll pretty much still believe whatever you tell them. I don't know if you've ever, I just remember once being at a picnic and there was this 4-year-old eating a big piece of watermelon. This was before the days of seedless, genetically modified fruit. So there's all these seeds in it. And this old guy is sitting there watching her eat her watermelon. And he looks at her and he goes, be careful not to swallow one of them seeds, because if you do, you'll grow a watermelon in your tummy. And he's laughing. He knows it's a joke, But the child, I just see her eyes get big as saucers. And she's like, what? Because they just believe it. They don't know the difference between sarcasm or jokes. Have you ever heard a 4-year-old try to tell a joke? It's funny, right? In and of itself, because they don't understand that. They're very concrete. They don't understand abstract concepts. So everything's very black and white, very factual. Think about it. Why does the child believe in Santa Claus? Because you tell them, and they don't have the ability. I mean, that's so obvious that the idea of a guy flying around in a sleigh pulled by reindeer and going down chimney. I mean, everything about the notion of Santa Claus is so nonsensical that it doesn't take a lot of knowledge or understanding to realize that that can't be true. But how many kids believe in Santa Claus? I did when I was a kid. And now think about, what is the age that most kids either figure out or hear from their friends and realize, oh, it's not true. Santa Claus is just a myth. It's around age 8. So this is a very significant age. Age 8 is when a child, about age 8, it's not like on their birthday, but around age 8, it historically has been called the age of reason. And it's not really reasoning, but that is the age when a child can tell fact from fiction. And so that's when they start realizing, oh, Santa Claus is just fiction. It's not true. It's just a fairy tale. And I remember a time when I was about that age, about 7, 8 years old, and I was watching cartoons Saturday morning. And we did that every morning in my household. Every Saturday morning, we got up and watched cartoons. And I remember standing there watching, I think it was Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner. And all of a sudden I had the thought, is this real? And, we think that it's obvious, but it's not obvious to kids, to little kids. And so we have to be really careful what we put in front of them. Now, there's nothing wrong with imagination, and it's good to stimulate imagination. And but just, you can tell your child it's not real. And creativity, and that's very important in those years from 3 to 8. Children are very creative. They need outlets for their creativity to be able to explore and discover and manipulate the world around them to learn about the world. And they're taking in information about the world, but they're still not able to evaluate it or to categorize it and understand it. They're just taking in facts. And that's one thing they do in schools nowadays. They're trying to take high-level thinking skills and bring them down into early years, thinking that'll make our kids, smarter. And it's actually just confusing. They don't have the brain development to be able to do that. So the frontal cortex doesn't develop till last, and the brain develops from the bottom up. And so the ability to reason and think, solve problems and that sort of thing is the last part to develop. So in these early years, from 0 to, about 8, and even beyond that, a few years beyond that, a child's desires are the same as his needs. He doesn't know the difference between a need or a desire. You think about a little child in the grocery store and he sees the candy or the toy and he wants it. Well, to him, that's a need. He doesn't know that he doesn't need that, but he doesn't have the ability to even differentiate between needs and desires. So trying to reason with him and tell him why he doesn't need that, there's 2 flaws with that approach. A, to him, his desire is a need. He doesn't know the difference. And B, he can't reason. He can't understand logic. He just wants it. And so that's why we have to learn how to address that desire rather than trying to talk to his head, because desire comes from the heart and logic talks to the head. So we're going to learn more about how to connect with your child's heart and to where true influence happens in 2 weeks. So make sure you don't miss that lesson. So at the 8-year mark, they begin to be able to tell fact from fiction. We already talked about that. The child's brain hasn't developed to where he can reason, analyze, and make thought out choices. So they need very clear, concrete directions and instruction. And so a lot of times, we get into that lecturing and we're just confusing the child rather than keeping it simple and direct. So some examples of clear-cut commands or directives is pick up all the toys on the floor and put them in the toy cabinet. But a lot of times we get emotional and we're like, look at all these toys. We can't have dinner. We can't do what we need to do until all this is cleaned up. Why do you get so many toys out? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And the child just is like, what's the point, Mom? Just get to the point. So we need to dial it down, be very clear and direct, and just state what you want and make it very easy for your kids to hear, understand, and respond to what you're saying. Wash your hands before getting into the fridge. I think I wrote this the other day when my son came home and was getting in the fridge. I'm like, wash your hands first. So we don't need to get all emotional. We don't need to take their behavior personally, like, oh my gosh, you're doing that to drive me crazy. That's not what it's about. It's just about training them, because a child doesn't know. So that's our job, just to train them in the way they should go, not beating them all up for not knowing the way. That's our job. Teach them the way. Another one here, I just did wet towels go on the towel rack, if they leave them on the floor or whatever. So an example that happened just recently with my son. So y'all, if you were on here last week, I have a son who's 19 and has special needs. So his cognitive development is probably like a 4 or 5-year-old. I can't give him multiple step directions. So I have a constant reminder of what it's like to have little kids, just in case, you think, well, she doesn't remember how well. I have it every day. So one day I had to pick him up from his day hab, take him straight to his theater class. We didn't have time to go home and get a snack and all this. And so, I get, you get all like anxious and you're thinking about everything and hoping you can get everything done and be there on time and yada, yada, and bring him a snack and all this. And I'm old, people. I used to have a lot of energy, but I'm a grandmother. I have 8 grandkids, but I still have this child who, this son who's like a child. Excuse me. And so I had to think about it because I was working on this lesson. So I picked him up from school and said what I always say, how was your day? And so all this stuff's going through my head. I got to communicate to him. And instead of going home, which we always do, I said, we're going to theater class. And then I said, I brought him a snack in case he was hungry. I said, are you hungry? So, but my natural instinct was like to say, oh, hi, Jonathan, how you doing? We got to go to theater. We can't go home. I brought you a snack in case you're hungry. Are you hungry? And that overwhelming kind of monologue that we can easily get trapped in. So we have to dial that back. And just for young kids, just give them one thing at a time, and that's what I did with him. So that's a real simple way to make your life easier and to communicate to your child in a way that he can respond and understand. So a lot of times we call them disobedient or misbehaving when they're actually just immature and they don't understand what we're saying. We're confusing them, like that verse. Don't have unrealistic expectations, and yet they don't respond. So we call it, disobedience or whatever. So a lot of times what we call sin or disobedience is merely childish behavior, and they don't know. They're not choosing. They don't have the ability to choose. They're simply acting on impulse, and that's the way children are. So what motivates your child is not logic, reasoning, decision-making, choices. He's not going through all of that. Think about when you were a kid. Did you sit there and think about what you were going to do? No, you just act on impulse in the moment. What's in front of me? Oh, that looks good. That sounds good. That feels good. Let's do this. Let's do that. They're motivated by impulse, curiosity, survival. And these are all good things. We were actually created to be motivated by desire and to have our desires fulfilled. So we don't really want to shut that down, but we do want to direct our children in the way they should go. So the desire always overrides logic, even in adults. You think about it. You really want to go on that vacation and you're not sure your budget can handle it. Well, you'll find a way if you really want to go, right? And so, but with the kids, they don't even have that ability to think about it. It's just desire overrides logic all the time, and they don't even operate in logic. So our heart is bigger than our head, and that's the way it should be, because every world changer lived from their heart. They didn't live by logic. You think about Abraham and Isaac and Moses and all the ones that were world changers, even in science, like Einstein and all those great scientists. They lived in outside of this, and that's why they discovered and accomplished new things, because every new idea, every world changing discovery or action, it comes from the heart. The Lord told me once, live from your heart or you're dead. Because if you're living by logic, you're living in what's already known, and you'll never change the world. So God speaks to us in our heart, and that's where our destiny and the desires of our heart are put there to push us forward into what we were put on earth to do. So we don't want to shut down our child's heart. We want to learn how to nurture their heart and connect with her heart. And next week, I'm going to give you a very practical and easy way to connect with your child's heart, which is where true influence happens. So you don't want to miss next week. Let's see, I've got note cards today, so I'm trying to keep on track here. So yeah, so a child can't draw conclusions, a young child, and they cannot understand long-term consequences. They're, like I said, they're living in the moment. They don't step back and look at the big picture. They're actually, there's a quote from Paul Hegstrom. He wrote a book called Wounded Children, Grown Up Pain. I think that's the name of the book. And in that book, he says that a child under the age of puberty, we're talking like 12, 13, is lacking the chemicals in the brain. So pure science, this is not like any theory, the chemicals in the brain to see the whole picture and make decisions. So if we've been expecting our under 12, 13-year-old to make choices, remember what we say, think about it, and act on the big picture and consequences, long-term consequences, all that. We have unrealistic expectations of our children. The flip side of that is we have total control. We tell them the way it is, they believe it, and they act on it. If we understand that's the way it is, but if we start confusing them, and if we start reacting to them in the way that we've been taught, which is they're driven by their sin nature, they're acting out of sinful, we've got to, beat the tar out of them, beat the sin nature out of them, all those traditional mindsets, then we're seeing them through that lens. Then we're not seeing them with understanding. And so we're going to look at that. I can see that time is ticking here. I want to make sure I get through this. So let's look at that real quick. Well, let me finish this first, because otherwise I'll never come back to it. So our children, because they don't have that logic and reasoning, it's actually a blessing, because they're not evaluating information. They're not deciding whether things are true or not. So that's the blessing, that they'll believe whatever we tell them. And I say they're 100% heart. They're wide open. Their heart is wide open, which is a good thing, because the heart is how we connect with God. So we want to be able to speak to their heart and to nurture their heart, so that they can develop that foundation of a relationship with God when they're little. And that's the easiest time for them to do it, because once this gets in the way, then you start thinking about, well, is it really true? And you think about, kids go off to college and they start hearing all these other theories and ideas about the universe and God and all of that. And they start evaluating now with their logic and understanding. And they're like, But if they had a relationship with God, a heart relationship, instead of just head knowledge, if we develop that when they're little, then they know God. They know He's real. Nobody can talk you out of what you have experienced and what you know. So that's what we want to do. We want to nurture their heart. And it's really amazing, because it's so easy to do that. When grandkids were little, a couple of them, when I started learning this stuff. Some of them had already been born. But, I think I told the story where I held my granddaughter in my arms and I looked at her. She was 2 weeks old. They don't even smile on cue yet. They're just, totally just there. And I looked at her and I just looked at her with a straight face and I said, Stella, do you know Jesus? And I'm telling you, that child lit up like a pumpkin. Her body responded. She started like kicking and smiling from ear to ear. Her eyes got really big. And I was like, is that real? See, because I believe because our children are in that dreamlike state, their logic isn't in the way. See, when Adam and Eve ate that fruit, what happened? It awakened their human understanding. And then they began to see everything through that. And that's where everything got skewed. Before that, they were 100% spirit. And I believe the heart is the gateway to the spirit. And I've even looked at the scriptures, and I'm thinking the heart of our being is actually our spirit. But if nothing else, I know that the heart is the gateway to the spirit. How do we reach our child's spirit? Is through their heart. And so when we nurture their heart, that's how we connect with God. With the heart, one believes unto righteousness. With the heart, we connect with God. That's where we know God, not in our head. If you try to teach your child logically about who God is, they can be talked out of it. But if they experience God and they know him at the heart level and they interact with him in their heart, because that's where we interact with God, not in our head. And I don't know about you, but as an adult, I have to constantly be fighting against that and go, oh, I'm talking to you through my head, God. Got to switch to my heart, But kids don't have that in the way. And so we want to make sure that we don't shut their heart down. And so when we talk to kids through logic and reasoning, that's exactly what we're doing. So we need to stop that and start speaking, like I said last week, to who they really are. So if you think about kids, they're all heart. They love big, they forgive quickly, they express without restraint. You never have to wonder what a child is thinking or feeling. It just comes out, and there's no filter on their emotions. So this heart is the avenue to where we program their life, because like I said last week, is that when we write on their heart, we're actually scripting their entire life, because the Bible says that out of the heart come the issues of life. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. A good man out of his heart brings good things. And so the heart is where that's what children are. They're 100% heart, and we don't want to shut that down. So whatever's written on their heart becomes their software for life. So it isn't until age 13 that the ability to reason begins to develop. And that's why teenagers start looking at their parents differently and start questioning, because now they're sorting things out. They're beginning to see how their parents have interacted with them, and they're beginning to see that they have their own mind, their own choices, and they're having autonomy. So teen rebellion is not teen rebellion. Teen rebellion is when a child gets to the age where they can have an opinion about how their parents have been raising them. And so if you have not connected with their heart and you haven't dealt with them with understanding, then that's what causes teen rebellion, because they feel like they've never been heard. If you don't hear their heart, we're going to talk about that next week, how to hear your child's heart and connect with it. Then they feel like they haven't been heard, because you are not your brain. You are your heart and your spirit. And so if that's shut down, you're actually creating a barrier between you and your child. And that's going to grow over time. And your child's going to get to be a teenager and say, they just don't understand me. I got to go somewhere else. And so we don't want that to happen. But it is until age 13. If you think about it, age 13 is when the Hebrew culture has what they call a bar mitzvah. And if you know anything about bar mitzvah, well, if you don't, I'm going to teach you just the basics. So bar mitzvah literally means son of the commandment. And it wasn't until a boy was 13 years old that in the Hebrew culture, he is now held accountable for his own actions. Prior to that time, the parents were held accountable. And so on a bar mitzvah, the father would get on his knees, raise his hands to heaven and say, thank you, Lord, this burden is lifted off of me, because now he's on his own. Not on his own, but he's now accountable. So to the commandment until they were 13. And for was 12, and that lines up exactly with science. Girls go through puberty a little bit sooner than boys, and so it also ties in with what Paul Hegstrom said. And by the way, Paul Hegstrom is he's a believer, and he had a terrible childhood. There was abuse, and not from his parents, and nobody knew he was being sexually abused multiple times. He was a pastor's child. It was just he had a horrible time. The Lord used all that for good, because as an adult, he went into the field of understanding, what makes humans tick and do what they do. And so he said, psychology tells us that before puberty, the child lacks the chemicals in the brain to make thought out decisions. So isn't that interesting how all of this lines up? History, the Jewish culture, the bar mitzvah is 13, science, and all of this lines up together. So I think that's really cool. And science always validates what is true and what God says. I have a lot of cards left here. Oh no, I was putting my
Okay, we lost her for a minute. Maybe she'll come back in. I hope y'all enjoying this so far. I'm taking notes. Y'all taking notes? I gotta raise these little grandchildren, 3 and 4. I mean, she's 1 and 4-year-old. Yeah, I need some help. Like, help. This is interesting to me. And I have a 13-year-old too. All right. So I'm glad to see you on here, Miss Margaret and Nicole. Thank y'all all for being in here while she's getting back on. See you. Thank you for being here, Vet. And if any of y'all know anybody else, we got 2 more weeks. Is it 2 more weeks? To October the 10th. So only on Sundays at this time, 10 o'clock. So, other people, invite them on, tell them about it, and we will be putting this on YouTube also. So if anybody missed anything, they can go back and get it. This is part 2, and we'll be doing part 3 next week. I don't know if she knows she's off or not. Yep. Anybody got any questions you have? This would be a good time to put down your questions you have for Amy. Thank Amy for being here. Okay. Anybody have any questions, any thoughts? 3 more. Oh, it's 3 more weeks. Yeah, Jillian. Yep. Thank you for being here, Jillian. Good morning, everybody. If I didn't say good morning to you. Good morning, Nicole. Good morning, Margaret. Is it morning, still morning? Yvette and others that are here. Okay, yes, I am too, Margaret, learning a whole lot here. This is good stuff. Even if you don't have kids now, your kids grown, you got grandkids, you got other people you're associated with. And when you see kids, this is good material to practice and use on and help others. You got me trying to get the toy one. So that nurturing the heart is very important. Yeah, Nicole, good information. Yes. Yeah, this is good stuff. Yes, it is. I wonder if she knows she was off. She just clicked back on. Trying to see if she get back on. It looked like it was trying to, her internet was breaking up too. Yeah. Awesome. So it's important to know about the brain development, because I surely was doing the logic talk. I was doing the logic talk, so here she comes. She coming back in. The reasoning and the logic talk. Okay. All right, sis. You back in? You back in? We waiting on you.
I'm sorry, all of a sudden I lost connection. I don't know if it was my internet or what. So I just was praying over this connection so we can get through this. But We're almost done. Well, it was a good breaking point, because I want to talk about, we talked about the brain and how that develops and how our children receive and process information and what motivates them. And now I want to talk about their spiritual state, because we've been taught that our children are born sinful, right? Well, that teaching comes from John Calvin. And if you know anything about Calvin, he was very stern. His ideas about God were very academic and very rigid. God was angry. He was distant. If you know anything about Calvin, I know that anyone in this group would not say in any way that they were Calvinists. But the Pilgrims and the Puritans were influenced greatly by John Calvin, and they brought a lot of those ideas to America, and they have infiltrated the Western church, especially in America. And so we don't even know it, that this residual, misinformation about children is in our churches, but it is. And so he taught that, man was born totally depraved, meaning completely and utterly dark. There was nothing good in us. And that children, that they were completely separated from God. They were born in sin, and they were, and that was basically it. So we've kind of believed that, right? That our children are born with a sin nature. They're fallen. And yes, we all need to be regenerated and have our spirits reborn, but it's so easy to do. I mean, you can tell your little baby that they're forgiven and that they're one with God. And the thing about it is, we're only separated in our own mind from God. Jesus has reconciled us back to God. He paid for the sins of the entire world. So a lot of people just don't know it, right? And so they do. We can nurture that relationship they have from the time they're born. It's very easy to do. So I want to show you in the scriptures what the scriptures say about little children. So Jesus said in Matthew 18:3, assuredly I say to you, and I think I shared this scripture last week, unless you are converted and become as a little child, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And so that's a very strong verse, and you don't really hear a lot of teaching on it. But Jesus is saying that unless you're converted and become as a little child, you can't enter heaven. He said there's no other way. And so what is it about little children? And maybe some of you are already thinking about what it is, because I've talked about it. Think about what is required to enter the kingdom of heaven. You just have to believe, right? You just believe on the Lord Jesus and you're saved. And so we said it already. Children believe whatever you tell them. So if you tell them that Jesus is Lord, that he died for their sins, that they're completely accepted by God, they'll believe it, and they'll grow up believing that's who they are. Think about how far ahead of the game you will be if you just do that with your kids when they're little. And I taught this class to a group at my church last spring. And one of the moms, she got hold of this, and she was like, just tell them, instead of, beating around the bush. We're trying to take our kids to the promised land through the wilderness. If you think about it, the Lord told me this one day. It's like by teaching them right and wrong, and that's all the law. The law taught us, gave us the knowledge of sin, the knowledge of right and wrong. So we're thinking they need to go through this wilderness of sin and know their sin and know they're sinful and what's right and what's wrong in order to be saved. And it just isn't true. In fact, it's wasting. A whole generation died in that. We don't want another generation to die under that teaching of religion, of that knowledge of right and wrong. So we just need to tell them. So this mom got a hold of this idea, and she thought, I've been beating around the bush trying to, manage their behavior and teach them to behave. And we've missed the main thing and this window of opportunity just to tell our kids the truth. So she went home. She goes, I sat my kids down and I just told them. And she was like, and they said, okay. And she was like, why have we made it so hard? I'm like, I don't know, but we have. It's the enemy that's fooled us through, very influential, strong people. He's infiltrated like John Calvin. And so anyway, our children, they just believe. That's the number one thing. They believe. So they have faith. They don't have any choice. They don't have the ability to question. You tell them, they believe it's so. The other thing about kids that's so phenomenal is that they don't have this knowledge of good and evil. They don't have the knowledge of right and wrong. That's what we've been focused on, trying to teach them that. But that's a good thing, because that is the fruit that destroyed the human race and separated us from God. They're actually innocent. If you don't have the knowledge of sin, it says where there's no law, there's no transgression, right? Romans 4:15. So if you don't know right and wrong, which is what the law is, you're not accountable to it. And so that goes back to what the Hebrew culture teaches as far as the bar mitzvah, because it wasn't until the age of logic and reasoning, 13, that they were even held accountable for their actions. Before that, it didn't matter because they couldn't understand right and wrong. And there's actually a quote in the ancient Hebrew writings. And the reason the Hebrew understanding is important, I'm sure you guys already know this, but I don't want to leave any stone unturned, is that the Hebrew, the Israelites, were the ones to whom the scriptures were given. And so it was written through their mindset, their culture. So when we understand their culture, it gives us a greater understanding of the scriptures. And so the Hebrew culture, over the years, the rabbis, the greatest rabbis, would give their interpretation of the scriptures through the lens and the mindset of the Hebrew culture, because that's their culture. And so one of the rabbis had written about children. I have some quotes here in the very early ages of childhood. One of them wrote, "Childhood is a garland of roses. The very breath of a child is free of sin." So they saw children as sinless, innocent. We think they're sin. We've been taught they're sinful. They're driven by their sin nature. It's not true. Another one said, "Children are the hope of the world." I think we all believe that. Another one observed this many centuries ago, before we had all this current brain research, that a child is not a thinker, and he's unable to distinguish good from evil. So you call that state of, before Adam and Eve knew good and evil, they were innocent. They lived in innocent bliss, and that's the way our children are. And we force feed them, this knowledge of good and evil, and we're poisoning, we're stealing their innocence. And so when we begin to see our children as innocent, then we'll interpret their behavior differently. And so having no knowledge of good and evil, not knowing right and wrong, is a state of innocence. So let's see here. So how do we know that children have no knowledge of good and evil? Is that in the scriptures? Well, yes, it is. So in fact, Jesus told us, that they were qualified for heaven. So we know that they don't have sin, because you can't go to, or that they believe, right? And so we know you can't go to heaven if you have sin, right? You have to be completely clean. And so there's a passage in Deuteronomy 139 where the Father is speaking to Moses, and it's after the Israelites came to the promised land, and the Lord said, I'm going to give you this land. And they sent the 12 spies in, and no, this wasn't the 12 spies. Sorry. Yeah, no, they sent the 12 spies in, and 10 of them came back and said, "Oh, there's giants in the land. We can't take this land. They're too big, blah, blah, blah." And so they all decided as a nation, no, we can't go in. And so what was their sin? If you look in Hebrews, it says that because of unbelief, they didn't believe what God said, they were disqualified from the promised land. So there you have that thing of believing, so that they didn't believe. They were in unbelief. And so here's what God says to them. It's in Deuteronomy 139. He says, "Moreover, your little ones and your children, the ones you say who will be victims, who today have no knowledge of good and evil." Just throws that in there, doesn't explain it. "They shall go in there, to them I will give it, and they shall inherit it, they shall possess it." So the knowledge of good and evil, they didn't have the ability to judge. Oh, God says we'll take the land, let's go do it. You think about kids think they can jump off of, put a cape on like Superman and jump off a tall building or something, off the house, the roof, and they can fly. Why? Because they don't have any ability to evaluate and judge. They don't know what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So if God said it, we believe it. If the parent says it, they believe it. And so it's this blind obedience, just believing what God says, that actually gives children an advantage, because they don't have the ability to question God. So they have no knowledge of good and evil. And Jesus said they're qualified for heaven, so that they can't have sin. And we know that it's faith that takes away our sin. Jesus took it away. But if you're not guilty of sin, if you have no knowledge of good and evil, where there's no law, there's no transgression, then you're not guilty of sin. So our children are not sinful. Now, do they have a sin nature? Yes. We're all born with the nature of Adam, our earthly father. But we also have a spirit that in the garden died. When Adam and Eve ate the fruit, God said, in the day you eat of it, you will die. So we know something died in that day. God means what he says. And so it was their spirit, because that's why Jesus said you have to be born again, and that's a spiritual rebirth. So we can actually nurture our child's rebirth from an early age. So if we teach them right and wrong, we're nurturing their sin nature. They have that nature. They don't have sin, but they have that sin nature, that carnal nature. So we can feed that by teaching them right or wrong, or we can nurture their spirit back to life and call it forth by feeding their spirit. And so that's what we want to do. We need to get away from this behavior management and teaching them right and wrong, and start nurturing their spirit, telling them who they are in Christ and the truth about God and the truth of who they are. And they'll just grow up and grow into knowing God. In fact, because they don't have this in the way, it's like they have one foot in the spirit realm all the time. It's almost like they're more in the spirit realm than there are in the natural realm when they're very little, and even beyond 3 years old. So don't lose heart. It's never too late. It's not even too late once they're teenagers, because if a teenager if you've never spoken life to them, and I've seen this, I've worked with parents of teenagers who had teens that were in full-on rebellion, and you start speaking life to them, it's what they're craving. In fact, one quote I forgot to share with you last week says that even into adulthood, we all still crave our parents' approval and affirmation, that stamp of approval from our parents. So you start speaking approval to your teenager, it's still going to make a difference in his life. And you start speaking to him who he really is in Christ, it's never too late. I'm just showing you that we don't want to wait. We want to start when they're even in the womb, or at least when they're very little, as soon as they're born. Because when they're little, you're holding them so many hours of the day. You're feeding them, you're rocking them to sleep, you're holding them, whatever. A lot of moms carry their newborns in a carrier, so they can have them close to hear their heartbeat and everything while they're going about their day. And we can be speaking life into them and just creating that foundation for a lifetime of just knowing God and living in their true identity from an early age. So let's see here. Believing is what kids do best. I like to say it that way. They believe whatever you tell them. So, and faith is what qualifies us. And I love this verse in John 6:29, that where they ask Jesus, what must we do to work the works of God? And he says, just believe. The only work that we have to do is to believe. And that isn't even a work, because faith is a gift of God. Now, I don't know about you, but the moment that faith was given to me, I couldn't have resisted that if I had wanted to. And the Lord opened my eyes to the truth. And I'd been raised in religion, so I had the head knowledge about Jesus was the Son of God. He came to earth and he died for my sins. But when God gave me that faith unto salvation, that's when your spirit comes alive. So I had that moment in my life, but just believing, we don't even have to work at that. It's a gift. Every man's been given a measure of faith. But children have such faith. It's incredible. Oh, I want to show you this. This is I'm going to close with this because I can talk all day. And it's 10 o'clock. Or I'm sorry, it's 11 o'clock y'all's time if you're in the East. I'm in Central Time. So the Lord showed me this recently, and this is just phenomenal. Believing is obedience to God, because that's what he requires, believing. So we think of obedience as actions. Nope. To God, believing is obeying. And I'll show you this. He showed it to me in Hebrews 4, where he's talking about how the Israelites were, whoever the writer of Hebrews is saying, it was unbelief that kept them out of the promised land. And then he says, let us be careful so that none of us fall into the same pattern of disobedience. You see, disobeying, he equates that with unbelief. And so if believing is what God requires, then unbelief is disobedience. So I heard one guy, one preacher say it this way, that God's love language is, he just wants to be believed. All we have to do is believe in the promises. All the promises are ours. We don't have to do anything to earn promises. We don't have to do anything to earn salvation. Just believe. You just read it in the scripture, say, oh my gosh, it's right there. You know, my pastor said something last Sunday, just in a little, it wasn't even the sermon. He was just giving a little encouragement there after the worship. And he said, you know, I was thinking about that verse that says, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. And he said, too many believers are beggars and they're asking God for what he's already said is so. And so I've been dwelling on that. And this week, and just, you know, when we look at the promises of just saying, that's what it is so. That's what amen means. When we say amen, it means it is so. And so God's promises, they are for us. And so when we believe, they're ours, and that's the only thing required. So believing is a function of the heart, and children are 100% heart. We've already said that. I've already said that. I'm just flipping through my last 3 notes here to make sure I didn't miss anything. So if you want to raise a world changer, you know, I mentioned this earlier, is that every person who impacted the world followed their heart, not their logic and reasoning. And it wasn't because of good behavior they changed the world. So we talked about that. So just in conclusion, I just want to say that we as adults have to remove our preconceived ideas, the traditions of men, our false beliefs, and our logic to actually see our children the way God sees them. We have to really, like I've showed you in the scriptures, what Jesus said about children and what the Father said about children. And it isn't anything like what I don't know about y'all, but what I've heard in church. I didn't get saved till I was 34. And when I came into the church, I was appalled at how pastors talked about, if you don't spank your kids, you're not a good Christian. By the way, we're going to talk about that in a few weeks too. You know, one pastor stood up and said, this is a spanking church. I'm like, dear God, you know, but that's the extent, that's our knowledge of children. You know, we have to look at the scriptures and see what it says about our children, right? So then and only then will we be delivered from this big lie that our children are sinful, and it's keeping our children from knowing God and from fulfilling their kingdom destiny. So that's all I have for you guys today. Are there maybe, Odila, if anyone has typed a question in the Facebook group, maybe you can see there and you can ask the questions for them. So I guess I'll just say that if you guys have any questions and you're on Facebook, if you want to type them in the comments, Odila can see this. I can't see Facebook and do this too. I can't do that many, and my laptop is in the shop. So I'm just working on my phone today with note cards. And so if anyone has any questions and you want to type them in the chat, we'll see if we can get those answered. Or any feedback from last week, anything you tried this week and either had success or not with, that you need help with. I'll wait just a minute. I know there's a lag time between Zoom and Facebook.
We waiting. I'll just say that I was one of those people that was doing the reasoning and the logic. Like, okay, I gotta do from the heart. I gotta nurture the heart. Okay. And
Yes.
A couple of people on Facebook said this is really good stuff. They are really enjoying this. I don't see any questions yet. I don't see any. They were writing down the scriptures that you was putting up here on Facebook. Miss Margaret, thank you, Miss Margaret, for that. And the other, I guess they don't have any questions.
All right. Well, yeah, at the beginning, I was I was thinking they'd have to get on Zoom to ask questions, so maybe they weren't posting them, but that's fine. You know, if you guys do have questions, I encourage you next week to have those prepared. And also to get on Zoom, because it's easier for us to interact at the end. We can talk live on Zoom if you have questions or comments.
Yeah,
So,
that would be beautiful. That would
yeah,
be
but no worries. It's all good. I'm glad you guys joined me today, and
yes.
thanks for having me again.
And I'll put the recording on YouTube.
Okay. And next week I'm gonna give you how to connect with your child's heart, because that's the key. That's the key, really.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's gonna be good. That'll be very practical application.
Okay, that's good. Somebody put down here, that's true about, that's my grandson. That's true about the 8-year-old. My granddaughter talks about the tooth fairy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Tooth fairy, Easter bunny, all those fairy tales, you know. And like I said, imagination is not a bad thing, but we just want to be careful about what we have them imagine. You know, our imagination was actually given so that we could see in the spirit realm, so that we can on the screen of our imagination, we can see heaven, we can see spiritual beings, we can see what's going on in the spiritual realm. And so, you know, I know that there's a handful, I don't have anything off the top of my head to tell you where to go, but there's a handful of writers out there who are writing books for children along these lines to help them to see what the spirit realm is like. Because I personally believe that they can see it, but we don't nurture it. And so it's shut down because we bring them into the real world and they forget about actually the spiritual world, which is actually more real than the natural world. But
yeah, she put down the rest of it. She said it's she's still talking about the 8-year-old. She said it's not real. We put money under her pillow.
Yeah, they usually figure it out. You know, that reminds me of something that happened with my granddaughter when she was about 4 years old. She was in my car with me in the back seat, and we got stuck in traffic. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to be a little late for wherever we were going." She goes, "Well, Grandma, why don't you just be like Lightning McQueen," which was the car in that Cars movie? "Just drive over the other cars." And to her, because she saw that in a cartoon, she literally thought it was real.
Right.
And I had to tell her, I said, "Well, you know, that's just make believe. That's a cartoon. You can't really do that." And so, you know, we don't know what's going through their little minds that they see on TV that they think is true.
Right. That's so true. Oh, wow. That's good.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, that's all I see.
Okay.
Everybody's, you know, they're agreeing and thanking you for this good lesson. Miss Margaret put down, thank you, such an awesome lesson. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for joining me, Margaret. I have a daughter named Margaret, by the way. Good name.
Awesome.
All righty. Well, I'm going to sign off. Thanks, Adela, for having me
Okay.
again.
Thank you all for being here.
Yeah. See you next week.
Next week, y'all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. again. The line should have went on. Yeah, I didn't close this yet. Close that. Yeah.